The evening sky had just begun to darken as Dion finished his shift at Parkside Grocery. His shoulders ached from restocking shelves for the past 8 hours, but he still had a small smile on his face. Today was payday, which meant he could finally buy that textbook he needed for his design class. At 26, Dion was older than most of his classmates at the community college, but that didn't bother him much. Life had taken him on a different path, and he was grateful to be pursuing his education now, even if it meant working full-time and studying late into the night. See you tomorrow. "Mrs. Wilson," Dion called to the store manager as he pushed through the front doors. "Stay safe out there, honey." "It looks like rain," she responded, waving from behind the register. Dion zipped up his worn blue jacket and set off down the street. His apartment was about a 20-minute walk from the store, but he didn't mind. These walks gave him time to think, to plan, to dream about the buildings he would someday design, spaces that would bring communities together rather than push them apart. The first few raindrops began to fall as he turned onto Maple Avenue. Dion quickened his pace, not wanting to get caught in a downpour. That's when he noticed her. About half a block ahead, a woman was walking slowly, one hand against a brick wall for support, the other resting on her very pregnant belly. Even from a distance, Dion could tell something wasn't right. Her steps were uneven, and she seemed to be struggling to stay upright. Just as Dion started jogging toward her, the woman doubled over, gasping. Her knees buckled and she began to fall. Dion's tired body moved faster than his mind could process. He lunged forward, closing the distance between them in seconds, and caught her just before she hit the ground. "Whoa, I got you," he said, his voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up at him, her face contorted in pain. She was beautiful, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and warm brown eyes now wide with fear. Her clothing looked expensive, a tailored maternity dress under a light coat. But at that moment, she was just someone who needed help. "The baby," she managed to say between labored breaths. "I think it's coming." Dion helped her to a nearby bench. "Should I call an ambulance?" She shook her head. "My phone died. I was trying to walk to St. Mary's Hospital. It's only 3 blocks from here." Her accent was slight, perhaps Chinese or Korean, Dion thought. "Where's your family? Someone should be with you," Dion said, looking around as if expecting to see a worried husband appear from around the corner. "My driver called in sick. I thought I could make it on my own." She winced, holding her belly tighter. The contractions weren't supposed to be this close yet. "I'm 2 weeks early." Dion ran a hand over his short hair, thinking quickly. The rain was starting to fall harder now. Leaving her alone wasn't an option, but neither was trying to deliver a baby on a public bench. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lynn," she replied, her breathing slightly calmer now that the contraction had passed. "I'm Dion. Listen, Lynn, St. Mary's is just a few blocks away, like you said. Do you think you can walk if I help you? I can carry you if I need to." Lynn nodded, determination replacing some of the fear in her eyes. "I can walk, just stay with me?" "Of course," Dion said without hesitation, offering his arm for support. As they began their slow journey toward the hospital, the rain fell steadily around them. Dion held his jacket over Lynn's head, leaving his own shoulders to get soaked. He didn't care. All that mattered was getting her safely to the hospital. "So, Dion," Lynn said between careful steps, clearly trying to distract herself from the discomfort, "what were you doing out here in the rain?" "Just heading home from work," he replied. "I work at the grocery store back there and go to school during the day. What are you studying?" Lynn asked, pausing as another contraction began to build. Dion waited patiently, supporting more of her weight as she breathed through the pain. When she nodded that she was ready to continue walking, he answered, "Architectural design. I want to build housing that people can actually afford, you know? Places that bring people together instead of just being somewhere to sleep." Lynn looked at him with genuine interest. "That's a wonderful goal. What made you choose that path?" Dion hadn't expected such a question from someone in the middle of labor, but he appreciated the conversation, keeping them both focused on something besides the rain and her pain. "I grew up in public housing," he explained. "The buildings were falling apart, but the community was strong. I always thought, what if these spaces were designed to strengthen that community, not work against it? What if they were beautiful and functional and affordable all at once?" Lynn nodded thoughtfully. "The world needs more thinkers like you." They turned a corner and Dion could see the hospital lights glowing in the distance. "Almost there," he encouraged. "Tell me more," Lynn said, her voice strained. "About your studies. Your plans." So Dion talked as they walked the final block. He told her about his favorite professor who'd worked on community projects in Detroit. He described the small model he'd built for his midterm project, a mixed-use space with a community garden on the roof. He even mentioned his struggle to afford the specialized software he needed for his advanced classes. What Dion didn't talk about was how tired he was most days, trying to balance work and school. He didn't mention the scholarship he'd lost when his mother got sick 2 years ago, and he had to drop out temporarily to care for her. He didn't bring up the student loans piling up or the nights he went to bed hungry, so he could pay for his textbooks. Those weren't things you dumped on a stranger, especially not one who was about to give birth. As they approached the emergency entrance, Lynn stopped suddenly, gripping Dion's arm with surprising strength. "Thank you," she said, looking directly into his eyes. Most people would have walked by. He didn't even hesitate. Dion shifted uncomfortably under her intense gaze. "Anyone would have done the same?" Lynn shook her head. "No, they wouldn't. Trust me, I know." Before Dion could respond, a nurse spotted them from inside and rushed out with a wheelchair. "Ma'am, are you in labor?" "Yes," Lynn said, allowing herself to be helped into the chair. "My contractions are about 4 minutes apart now." The nurse looked at Dion. "Are you the father?" No, Dion said quickly. "We just met." She was walking to the hospital alone when her labor started. The nurse's expression softened slightly. "Well, it's good you were there. We'll take care of her now." As they began to wheel Lynn inside, she reached out and caught Dion's hand. "Wait, how can I reach you?" "To thank you properly?" Dion hesitated. He didn't have business cards or anything fancy like that. After a moment, he pulled an old receipt from his pocket and borrowed a pen from the nurse to jot down his phone number. "You don't need to thank me," he said, handing her the paper. "Just focus on having a healthy baby." Lynn tucked the receipt carefully into her purse. "I never forget kindness, Dion. Never." The automatic doors slid open and the nurse wheeled Lynn inside, leaving Dion standing alone in the rain. He stood there for a moment, wondering if he should go inside and wait. But what would be the point? Lynn surely had family who would be arriving soon. The last thing she needed was some stranger hanging around. With a final glance at the hospital doors, Dion turned and began the long walk home. His clothes were soaked through and he'd probably catch a cold, but he couldn't help smiling. Sometimes life threw you into the strangest situations. He had no way of knowing that this chance encounter would change his life forever. To him, it was simply the right thing to do, helping someone in need. He couldn't have imagined that the well-dressed pregnant woman was actually Lynn Chen, founder and CEO of one of the largest architectural firms in the country. As he walked home through the rain, Lynn was already making plans that would offer Dion the opportunity he'd been working so hard for. Plans that would bring his vision of community-focused architecture to life on a scale he had never dreamed possible. But for now, Dion was just a tired student heading home to his small apartment, feeling good about having helped someone today. The next morning, Dion woke to the sound of rain still pattering against his bedroom window. His muscles ached more than usual, a reminder of his quick sprint to catch Lynn before she fell. He stretched and glanced at his phone, 7:15 a.m. He had just enough time to shower before his 9 a.m. class. As he moved around his small apartment, his mind drifted back to the pregnant woman from last night. He wondered if she'd had her baby yet, if everything had gone smoothly. It felt strange to have shared such an intense moment with someone and then just walk away, probably never to see them again. "Focus, Dion," he muttered to himself as he gathered his textbooks. Today was important. His professor was reviewing final project proposals, and Dion had worked for weeks on his concept for affordable housing with built-in community spaces. The community college campus was only a 10-minute bus ride from his apartment. Dion found a seat near the back, pulled out his sketchbook, and made a few last-minute adjustments to his design. The concept had come to him after visiting his cousin's new apartment building, a soulless stack of identical units with no shared spaces except a tiny, unused lobby. People lived on top of each other, yet remained complete strangers. Dion's design was different. It featured a central courtyard with community gardens, a playground visible from the surround, Apartments so parents could keep an eye on their kids while cooking dinner, and flexible spaces that could be used for everything from job training to neighborhood celebrations. It'll never get funded, his classmate Tyrell had said when Dion first shared the idea. Developers want to maximize profits, not community. Maybe Tyrell was right, but Dion wasn't ready to give up on his vision. Someone, somewhere, had to care about more than just profit margins. The architectural design class was held in a bright studio space with large tables instead of desks. Professor Rivera moved from table to table, examining each student's proposal and offering feedback. When she reached Dion, she studied his drawings in silence for what felt like an eternity. "The integration of indoor and outdoor space is impressive," she finally said, "and I appreciate that you've included detailed cost analysis." Dion nodded, trying not to show how much her approval meant to him. "But," Professor Rivera continued, "have you considered how this would be marketed to investors? Community-focused designs are wonderful in theory, but you need to speak the language of people with money." "I understand," Dion said, though a part of him wanted to argue. Why should good design only exist if it made rich people richer? "Don't look so defeated," Professor Rivera said with a small smile. "I'm pushing you because this has potential. Real potential. But potential needs opportunity to become reality." The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes and a quick lunch break, where Dion sketched modifications to his design instead of eating most of his sandwich. By the time he headed to his evening shift at the grocery store, he'd nearly forgotten about the previous night's excitement. The store was unusually busy for a Tuesday. A burst pipe in another nearby grocery had sent their regular customers to Parkside, and Mrs. Wilson had called in everyone available to help manage the crowd. Dion was restocking the produce section when he noticed a well-dressed older Asian man watching him. Thinking the man needed help finding something, Dion approached him. "Can I help you find anything, sir?" The man studied Dion's face for a moment before speaking. "Are you Dion?" Surprised, Dion nodded. "Yes, that's me. My name is Wei Zhang. I'm Lin Chen's father." The man extended his hand. Dion's eyes widened as he shook the offered hand. "How is she? And the baby?" A smile transformed Mr. Zhang's serious face. "Both are doing very well, thanks in large part to you. My daughter gave birth to a healthy baby girl just before midnight." "That's great news," Dion said sincerely. "But really, I didn't do much." "Anyone would have—" Mr. Zhang held up a hand to stop him. "My daughter told me you would say that. She also told me you're studying architectural design and have some very interesting ideas about community-centered housing." Dion blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected Lin to remember those details, especially not while she was in labor. "Lin asked me to invite you to visit her and the baby," Mr. Zhang continued. "She would like to thank you personally." "That's really not necessary," Dion said, glancing around at the half-empty produce bins he still needed to fill. "I'm glad I could help, but please," Mr. Zhang said. "It would mean a great deal to her, and to our family." There was something in the older man's tone that made Dion hesitate. It wasn't exactly demanding, but there was an intensity to it that suggested this was important. "I work until 9 tonight," Dion said finally, "and I have early classes tomorrow." Mr. Zhang nodded. "Tomorrow evening, then? I can send a car for you." "A car," Dion repeated, surprised again. "That's really not—" Lin would insist, Mr. Zhang said firmly. "Shall we say 6 o'clock?" Before Dion could figure out how to politely decline, Mrs. Wilson appeared beside them. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, giving Mr. Zhang a curious look. "Yes, ma'am," Dion answered quickly. "Mr. Zhang was just thanking this young man for helping my daughter last night," Mr. Zhang finished smoothly. "He's a credit to your establishment," Mrs. Wilson beamed. "Dion's one of our best, always willing to go the extra mile." Mr. Zhang pulled out a business card and handed it to Dion. "Tomorrow at 6, then. Text this number your address." Dion looked down at the card. It was heavy, expensive-looking paper with just a name and phone number printed in elegant font. "No company name, no title. Okay," he agreed finally. "Tell Lin I said congratulations." After Mr. Zhang left, Mrs. Wilson raised an eyebrow at Dion. "What was that all about?" Dion shrugged, trying to seem casual. "Just helped a pregnant lady get to the hospital last night. No big deal." But as he went back to stocking tomatoes and bell peppers, Dion couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was happening. Why would this family, who clearly had money, be so interested in thanking him? And how had Mr. Zhang found him here at work? The next day passed even more quickly than the one before. Dion found himself checking the time constantly as 6 o'clock approached. He'd texted his address to the number on the card that morning and received a simple confirmation in response. At 5:45, Dion stood in front of his closet, suddenly aware that he didn't own anything appropriate for whatever this visit might entail. He finally settled on his least worn jeans and a navy blue button-up shirt he usually saved for job interviews. At exactly 6, his phone buzzed with a text. "Your car is outside." Dion looked out his window and nearly dropped his phone. A sleek black car that looked like it belonged in a movie was parked at the curb. The driver, wearing an actual uniform, was standing beside it, scanning the apartment building. For a brief moment, Dion considered not going down. This was getting weird. But curiosity won out, and he grabbed his jacket and keys. The driver opened the rear door as Dion approached. "Good evening, sir. My name is Michael. I'll be taking you to the Chen residence." The interior of the car was nicer than any place Dion had ever lived. The leather seats were soft, and there was a small screen showing their route to a neighborhood Dion had only seen in magazines, Lakeside Heights, the most exclusive area in the city. As they drove, Dion tried to make sense of it all. Who exactly was Lin Chen, and why did she live in Lakeside Heights? He recalled her expensive clothes and the way she carried herself with such confidence, even while in labor. She was clearly wealthy, but lots of people had money. This felt like something else entirely. 20 minutes later, the car turned into a gated driveway. Dion's jaw dropped as they proceeded up a winding road to a modern mansion overlooking the lake. Floor-to-ceiling windows gleamed in the early evening light, and the landscaped gardens seemed to go on forever. "We're here, sir," Michael said, opening Dion's door. Dion stepped out, suddenly very aware of his worn shoes and the small hole near the cuff of his jeans that he'd hoped wouldn't be noticeable. What was he doing here? Before he could reconsider, the front door opened and Mr. Zhang appeared, smiling broadly. "Dion, welcome. Please come in. Lin is eager to see you." Taking a deep breath, Dion walked toward the door, toward whatever unexpected turn his life was about to take. He had no idea that behind those doors waited not just Lin and her new baby, but an opportunity that would change everything he thought was possible for his future. The inside of Lin's home made Dion feel like he'd stepped onto the set of a movie. The entrance hall opened into a massive living area with ceilings so high they seemed to disappear. One entire wall was glass, offering a breathtaking view of the lake below. Everything looked expensive but tasteful. Nothing flashy, just quietly perfect. "This way," Mr. Zhang said, leading Dion through the living area toward a hallway. "Lin is resting in the east wing with the baby." East wing. Dion tried to keep his face neutral. Who had a house big enough to have wings? As they walked, Dion noticed the artwork on the walls. Not generic landscapes, but striking architectural sketches and photographs of buildings unlike any he'd seen before. "These are amazing," he said, pausing to look at a drawing of a building that seemed to flow like water. Mr. Zhang smiled. "You have a good eye. That's the Chen Innovation Center in Singapore. My daughter designed it when she was just 28. Dion looked at the older man in surprise. "Lin designed this?" Before Mr. Zhang could answer, a door at the end of the hallway opened and a nurse stepped out. She nodded to Mr. Zhang and gestured for them to enter. The bedroom was spacious but cozy, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. Lin was sitting up in a large bed, looking remarkably well rested for someone who had just given birth. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. "Dion," she said, her face brightening. "You came." "Congratulations," he said, suddenly feeling awkward and out of place. "Your dad said everything went well." "Thanks to you," Lin replied. "Please, come sit." Dion perched carefully on the edge of a chair beside the bed. Up close, the baby was impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. "She's beautiful," he said honestly. "Would you like to hold her?" Lin asked. Before Dion could respond, she was already holding the baby out to him. Panic flashed through him. He'd never held a newborn before, but he carefully took the small bundle, supporting her head like he'd seen people do on TV. "What's her name?" he asked, looking down at the sleeping infant. "May," Lin said softly. "It means beautiful in Chinese." For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, the baby sleeping peacefully in Dion's arms. Then Lin spoke again. "My father tells me you were surprised by our invitation. Dion nodded, carefully handing May back to her mother. To be honest, I wasn't expecting anything like this. I was just glad to help. That's exactly why I wanted to thank you properly, Lynn said. You helped me without knowing or caring who I was. That's rare in my world. Mr. Zhang, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke up. I'll leave you two to talk. I need to check on dinner preparations. After he left, Lynn shifted slightly in bed, adjusting May against her chest. So tell me more about your architectural studies. You mentioned affordable housing with community spaces? Dion was surprised she remembered the details of their conversation from that night. Yeah, that's my focus. I believe buildings can either bring people together or keep them apart, and too many developments do the latter. And your professor's response to your ideas? Lynn asked. Dion hesitated, then decided to be honest. She likes the designs, but says I need to learn to speak the language of money to get them built. Lynn smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. She's not entirely wrong, but money doesn't have to mean compromising good design. In my experience, it usually does, Dion said, thinking of all the bland, cheaply built apartment complexes sprouting up around the city. Not always, Lynn replied. She glanced toward a sleek laptop on the bedside table. Would you hand me that? I want to show you something. Dion passed her the computer and Lynn opened it one-handed, keeping May secure against her with her other arm. A few clicks later, she turned the screen toward him. On the screen was a 3D model of a building complex, not unlike Dion's own designs, but more refined, more developed. It featured multiple buildings arranged around central green spaces with rooftop gardens and large windows to maximize natural light. This is the River District project, Lynn said. 150 units of mixed-income housing with childcare facilities, community kitchens, and spaces for local businesses. Dion leaned closer, amazed by the details. This is incredible. Where is it being built? Lynn's eyes met his. It's not, yet. The city approved the plans, but the developer backed out last month, claiming it wasn't profitable enough. That's a shame, Dion said, still studying the design. It would change so many lives. It still could, Lynn said. There was something in her tone that made Dion look up from the screen. Dion, how much do you know about Chen Innovations? Dion frowned, thinking. The name sounded vaguely familiar. They're a big architecture firm, right? International? Lynn nodded. Among other things. We design buildings, yes, but we also build them, manage them, innovate in sustainable materials and construction methods. Suddenly, Dion understood. The expensive clothes, the mansion, the driver. You own Chen Innovations? I founded it 12 years ago, Lynn said simply. We now employ over 5,000 people worldwide. Dion sat back, trying to process this information. Chen Innovations was one of the biggest names in architecture. He'd studied their projects in his classes, and he'd helped the woman who ran it all get to the hospital while she was in labor. I had no idea, he said finally. Most people treat me differently when they know who I am, Lynn said. That's why your kindness meant so much. You saw someone who needed help, not a potential business connection. She shifted May to her other arm. The nurse will be back to take her to the nursery soon. Before that happens, I have a proposition for you. Dion raised his eyebrows, waiting. Chen Innovations has a scholarship program for promising architectural students. Lynn continued. Full tuition, books, software, everything. It also includes a paid internship at our firm, working on real projects. Dion's heart began to race. A scholarship like that would change everything for him. I'd like to offer you one of these scholarships, Lynn said. No strings attached. Whether you eventually want to work with Chen Innovations or pursue your own path, the education would be yours. I don't know what to say, Dion stammered. This had to be a dream. Things like this didn't happen in real life, especially not to people like him. You don't have to decide right now, Lynn said gently. Take some time to think about it. Talk to your professors. The door opened and the nurse returned, smiling apologetically. Time for baby's checkup, Ms. Chen. Lynn nodded and handed May to the nurse. Once they were alone again, she turned back to Dion. There's something else, she said, her expression more serious now. The River District project I showed you, I'm considering taking it over personally through Chen Innovations. If I do, I'd like your input on finalizing the designs. My input? Dion repeated, stunned. But I'm just a student. I don't have any real-world experience. Sometimes fresh eyes are exactly what a project needs, Lynn replied. Your perspective on community spaces is valuable precisely because it comes from lived experience, not just theory. Before Dion could respond, Mr. Zhang appeared at the door. Dinner is ready whenever you are. Lynn smiled at her father, then turned back to Dion. Would you stay for dinner? We can talk more about the scholarship and the project. Part of Dion wanted to run, to get back to the familiar comfort of his small apartment where things made sense. But a stronger part of him knew this was an opportunity he couldn't walk away from. I'd like that, he said. As he followed Mr. Zhang back down the hallway, Dion thought about how differently this day had turned out than he'd expected. Yesterday he was just a struggling student working at a grocery store, worried about paying for next semester's textbooks. Today he was having dinner with the founder of Chen Innovations, who was offering him a full scholarship and the chance to work on a major housing project, all because he'd stopped to help someone in need. The dining room was smaller than Dion had expected, with a round table that seated 8 but was set for only 3. The walls were lined with bookshelves and family photos were displayed alongside awards and architectural models. As Mr. Zhang poured water into crystal glasses, Dion noticed a framed photo of a much younger Lin standing in front of a simple apartment building, not unlike the one he'd grown up in. That was our first home in America, Mr. Zhang said, following Dion's gaze. Lin was 10 when we immigrated. We lived there for 8 years before we could afford anything better. Dion looked at the photo with new understanding. Maybe Lin's interest in his ideas about community housing wasn't just professional courtesy. Maybe she really did understand where he was coming from. As they sat down to dinner, Dion realized this wasn't just about a scholarship or a job opportunity. This was about finding someone who shared his vision, someone who had the resources to make that vision a reality. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something he'd nearly given up on: hope. 2 weeks after that surprising dinner at Lin's house, Dion sat in Professor Rivera's office, staring at the scholarship offer letter in his hands. He'd read it at least 20 times since Lin's lawyer had emailed it to him, but he still couldn't quite believe it was real. This is unusual, Professor Rivera said, adjusting her glasses as she looked over her own copy of the letter. Chen Innovations typically announces their scholarship recipients once a year, after a lengthy application process. I've never seen them offer one directly like this, Dion nodded, still overwhelmed. I know. That's why I wanted your advice. Professor Rivera leaned back in her chair, studying him thoughtfully. May I ask how you met Lin Chen? She's not exactly someone you bump into at the coffee shop. Actually, I kinda did, Dion said, then explained the chance encounter that had led to all of this. As he spoke, he watched his professor's expression shift from skepticism to amazement. Well, she said when he finished, that explains the personal interest. But it doesn't explain why she's offering you both a scholarship and a consulting position on a major project. She tapped the second page of the letter. This River District project is big news in the industry. The original developer backing out made headlines. She said she liked my ideas about community spaces, Dion said, feeling suddenly defensive. That my perspective comes from lived experience, not just theory. Professor Rivera smiled. She's right about that. Your designs have always shown a deep understanding of how spaces affect community building. She handed the letter back to him. So what's holding you back? This is an incredible opportunity. Dion sighed, trying to organize his thoughts. Part of me feels like I'd be selling out. Taking charity because I happen to be in the right place at the right time. Is that what you think this is? Charity, isn't it? Dion asked. Lin feels grateful, so she's offering me this amazing deal. But what happens when that gratitude wears off? What if I'm not good enough? Professor Rivera's expression softened.
Dion, I've been teaching for 20 years.
I know talent when I see it. And trust me, Lin Chen didn't build a global company by making business decisions based on gratitude. If she's offering you this opportunity, it's because she sees something in you worth investing in. But I'm just a second-year student, Dion protested. There are people in our program with way more experience and better portfolios. Experience can be gained. Technical skills can be taught, Professor Rivera said firmly. But vision, that's something you either have or you don't. And you have it. She stood up and walked to her bookshelf, pulling out a thick book. Do you know what this is? Dion looked at the cover. Chen Innovations Designing Tomorrow. It's their 10th anniversary publication. Look at page 47. Dion flipped through the glossy pages until he found it. A photo of a housing complex surrounded by gardens and play areas. The caption read, Sunrise Heights, Lin Chen's first major project after founding Chen Innovations. Look familiar? Professor Rivera asked. Dion stared at the image, seeing clear similarities to his own designs. The central courtyards, the emphasis on shared spaces, the way the buildings oriented to maximize natural light and community interaction. Her approach has evolved over the years, Professor Rivera continued, becoming more sophisticated, more innovative. But those core principles about community spaces, they've always been part of her work. She sat back down, folding her hands on her desk. Lin Chen sees herself in you, Dion. That's worth far more than gratitude. Later that afternoon, Dion walked slowly through campus, his mind racing. Professor Rivera's words had shifted something in him. Maybe this wasn't charity after all. Maybe it was recognition. One community-minded architect seeing potential in another. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. How did the meeting go? Call me, Dion smiled. His mom had been over the moon about the scholarship offer, already planning to frame the letter and hang it on her living room wall. Unlike him, she'd had no doubts about accepting it. Take every blessing that comes your way, she'd told him. You've worked hard enough to deserve a few. He was about to call her when another text came through. This one from a number he didn't recognize. Dion, it's Lin. Wondering if you've had a chance to look over the River District plans I sent? No pressure. Just curious about your thoughts. Dion had indeed spent hours studying the detailed plans Lin had shared, making notes and sketches of possible improvements. He'd been hesitant to send them, worried his ideas would seem amateur compared to the work of seasoned professionals. But now, emboldened by his conversation with Professor Rivera, he decided to take the risk. Actually, I have some thoughts, he texted back. When would be a good time to discuss? The response came quickly. How about now? I'm downtown at our office. Stop by if you're free. Dion looked down at his worn jeans and faded t-shirt, not exactly appropriate for a meeting at the headquarters of a major firm. But Lin had seen him in worse the night they met, and that hadn't seemed to matter. I can be there in 30 minutes, he replied. The Chen Innovations building was a 20-story glass and steel structure downtown, its distinctive curved shape making it stand out among the more traditional office buildings surrounding it. Dion had passed it many times but never imagined he'd have reason to go inside. The security guard at the front desk greeted him by name as soon as he approached, which was both surprising and slightly unnerving. Ms. Chen is expecting you, Mr. Taylor. 18th floor. The elevator opened directly into a large open workspace filled with drafting tables, computer stations, and scale models of buildings. People were working intently, some in small groups, others alone with headphones on. No one seemed to notice Dion's arrival. Dion! Lin appeared from around a corner looking very different from the last 2 times he'd seen her. Gone was the pregnant woman in distress, and gone was the new mother resting in bed. This Lin was all business in a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Thanks for coming on such short notice, she said, leading him through the workspace. I've been thinking about the River District project all morning and wanted to get your input. They reached a large conference room with glass walls. Inside, the table was covered with blueprints and 3D models. One wall displayed a massive digital rendering of the project. Wow, Dion said, taking it all in. This is amazing. It's getting there, Lin agreed. But something's still missing. She gestured for him to sit. So you mentioned you had thoughts? For a moment, Dion hesitated. Who was he to suggest changes to a project designed by professionals with years of experience? But then he remembered Professor Rivera's words about his vision, and Lin's own comment about his lived experience being valuable. I do, he said, pulling out his sketchbook. I think the community spaces need to be more flexible. Lin raised an eyebrow. Go on. Dion flipped to a page of sketches and slid it across the table. Right now, you have designated areas for specific activities. Play areas for kids, sitting areas for adults, garden spaces. But in real communities, spaces evolve based on need. He pointed to one of his drawings. What if instead of fixed playground equipment, you had modular pieces that could be rearranged? And what if the community kitchen opened completely to the courtyard for larger gatherings? but could be closed off for smaller events or classes. Lynn studied his sketches, her expression thoughtful. Adaptability, she murmured. That's what's been missing. She looked up at him with a new respect in her eyes. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need, Dayon. People don't live in fixed ways. Why should their spaces be fixed? For the next 2 hours, they discussed his ideas, with Lynn calling in various team members to join the conversation. To Dion's surprise, they treated him not as a student or an outsider, but as a valued contributor with important insights. By the time they finished, Lynn's team had integrated several of his suggestions into the master plan, and Dayon felt a growing confidence he'd never experienced before. This was what it felt like to be taken seriously, to have his ideas not just heard but implemented. As the meeting wrapped up, Lynn walked him back toward the elevator. "You know," she said casually, "I wasn't sure you'd accept the scholarship. You struck me as someone with a strong independent streak." Dayon smiled. "I haven't officially accepted yet, but you will," Lynn said. It wasn't a question. The elevator doors opened and Dayon stepped inside. "I think I will," he agreed. "But not because I'm grateful to you for the offer." Lynn tilted her head, curious. "Oh? I'm accepting because we both know I have something valuable to contribute," Dayon said. "This isn't charity. It's an investment. In me, in my ideas, and in the communities these buildings will serve." A slow smile spread across Lynn's face. "That," she said as the doors began to close, "is exactly why I made the offer." As the elevator descended, Dayon felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time since receiving Lynn's offer, he was completely certain about accepting it, not because it would make his life easier, though it certainly would, but because it would allow him to make a real difference in the world. His phone buzzed again with a text from his mother. "Still waiting for that call. Good news or bad?" Dayon smiled as he typed his response. "Good news, Mom. Really good news. The kind that changes everything." 3 years later, Dayon stood at the edge of the construction site, watching as workers installed the large glass panels that would form the community center's walls. The River District project was finally taking shape after countless meetings, design revisions, and negotiations with the city. "Hard to believe it's really happening," a voice said beside him. Dayon turned to see Lynn, who was holding little May's hand. At 3 years old, May was a bundle of energy with her mother's sharp eyes and curious nature. She wore a tiny yellow hard hat that matched the adult ones, something she insisted on whenever they visited the site. "Sometimes I still think I'm going to wake up," Dayon admitted. "Back in my old apartment, late for class and worried about paying rent," Lynn smiled. "Instead, you're about to graduate with honors and your first major project is already being built. Not bad for 3 years' work." It had been a whirlwind since Dayon accepted the scholarship. The first year had been the hardest, balancing his regular classes with special seminars at Chen Innovations, working on the River District designs, and trying not to feel overwhelmed by it all. There had been moments of doubt, times when he wondered if he was in over his head. But Lynn had been right about one thing. The skills could be learned. What mattered was his vision, his understanding of how spaces could bring people together rather than keep them apart. That vision had been refined and strengthened over the past 3 years, but its core remained the same. "Uncle Dayon," May tugged at his pant leg. "Can we see the garden now?" Dayon grinned and knelt down to her level. "The garden's not planted yet, May. Remember the pictures? First we build the buildings, then we add the trees and flowers." May's face scrunched up in thought. "But where will the birds live while they wait?" "That," Lynn said, "is exactly the kind of question that makes for a good architect. Always thinking about all the users of a space, even the ones that fly." Dayon stood, feeling a familiar warmth at the praise. Over the years, his relationship with Lynn had evolved from mentee-mentor to something closer to colleagues. She still had far more experience and knowledge, but she treated his input with genuine respect, and he had learned to trust his instincts even when they differed from hers. "Speaking of birds," he said, "I've been thinking about adding some birdhouses to the community garden design. Maybe as a project the residents could build together once they move in." Lynn nodded approvingly. "I like that. It creates immediate investment in the space." May tugged at her mother's hand. "Can I build a birdhouse too?" "Of course," Lynn said. "You'll be our youngest architect." As they walked back toward the site trailer that served as their temporary office, Dayon reflected on how much had changed. The scholarship had covered his remaining years of school, and the paid internship had allowed him to quit his grocery store job. He'd moved to a better apartment closer to campus and the Chen Innovations office. For the first time in his life, he wasn't constantly worried about money. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was the confidence he now carried, the knowledge that his ideas had value, that his perspective mattered. Inside the trailer, the walls were covered with blueprints, material samples, and timeline charts. A large table in the center held the latest model of the project, showing all 5 buildings arranged around the central green space. "Have you thought more about my offer?" Lynn asked as she helped May out of her little hard hat. A week ago, Lynn had surprised Dion with a job offer, a full-time position at Chen Innovations after graduation, heading up a new division focused specifically on community-centered housing projects. It was a dream opportunity, but something had held him back from accepting immediately. "I have," Dion said, his expression turning serious. "And I'm incredibly grateful, but you have concerns," Lynn finished for him. She turned to May. "Sweetie, why don't you draw some birdhouses while Mom and Uncle Dion talk?" Once May was settled with paper and colored pencils at a small desk in the corner, Lynn gestured for Dion to sit. "Tell me what's holding you back. And please don't say gratitude again. We're way past that." Dion smiled despite himself. "It's not that. The position is amazing. It's just..." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I started this journey, my goal was to create housing that served communities like the one I grew up in. Places where people with limited resources could still have beautiful, functional spaces that brought them together." Lynn nodded, waiting for him to continue. "The River District is incredible," Dion went on, "but it's still a mixed-income development. Most of the units are market rate with just 20% set aside as affordable housing. And you want to focus on projects with deeper affordability," Lynn said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Dion admitted. "I know those projects are harder to fund, harder to get approved, harder to make profitable," Lynn added. "Right. Which is why I understand if Chen Innovations can't..." Lynn held up a hand to stop him. "Dion, do you know why I started this company?" The question caught him off guard. "To design innovative buildings." "That was part of it," Lynn agreed. "But the bigger reason was because I got tired of being told no by people who cared more about profit margins than people." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "When my family first came to this country, we lived in public housing that was falling apart. The owners did the bare minimum maintenance, the city looked the other way, and we just had to live with it because we had no other options." Dion nodded, remembering his own similar experiences. "I became an architect because I wanted to create spaces that respected the dignity of everyone who lived in them, regardless of their income," Lynn continued. "But when I worked for other firms, my ideas were always shot down for being too expensive, too idealistic." She gestured to the model of the River District. "This project matters, creating mixed-income communities where people from different backgrounds live side by side. That's important work. But it's not the only work that matters." Lynn pulled out her tablet and opened a file. "I've been working on something I wanted to show you." She handed Dion the tablet. On the screen was a proposal for a new development. 100 units of deeply affordable housing on a vacant lot in Westview, one of the city's most underserved neighborhoods. "The city owns the land," Lynn explained. "They've been trying to get developers interested, but no one wants to take it on because the profit margins are too slim. I've been in talks with the mayor about Chen Innovation stepping in." Dion scrolled through the proposal, his excitement growing. "This is exactly the kind of project I've been dreaming about." "I know," Lynn said simply. "That's why I want you to lead it." Dion looked up in surprise. "Me, but I'll have just graduated. A project this complex would have a full team supporting you," Lynn finished. "But yes, you would be the lead designer. Your vision, your direction." She took back the tablet and pulled up another file, an organizational chart. "The position I offered you would involve more than just the River District. It would be a new division within Chen Innovations, focused specifically on affordable housing and community development." Dion stared at the chart, seeing his name at the top of the division. "You're serious about this?" "Completely," Lynn said. "Chen Innovations has been successful enough that we can afford to take on projects with slimmer margins. We can subsidize the work that needs to be done with the work that pays the bills." She glanced over at May, who was thoroughly absorbed in her drawing. I want my daughter to grow up in a world where good design isn't just for the wealthy, where communities have spaces that bring people together, rather than keep them apart. That's always been the mission of this company, even if we've had to take a winding path to get there. Dayon was silent for a long moment, taking it all in. 3 years ago, he'd been a struggling student with big dreams but no clear path to achieving them. Now he was being offered the chance to create exactly the kind of housing he'd always believed in. "So," Lynn said finally, "what do you think? Are you in?" Before Dayon could answer, May came running over with her drawing. "Look what I made." She proudly held up a colorful picture of what appeared to be birdhouses in trees, with stick figures of people below. The figures were different colors and sizes, all holding hands in a circle around the trees. "It's the garden," May explained. "With houses for the birds and all the people who will live there. See, they're having a party." Dayon looked at the child's drawing, so simple yet capturing exactly what he'd been trying to explain for years about community spaces. "Out of the mouths of babes. Indeed, it's perfect, May," he said, then looked up at Lynn. "And yes, I'm in." 6 months later, Dayon stood at a podium on a makeshift stage, facing a crowd of community members, city officials, and reporters. Behind him was the vacant lot that would soon become Westview Commons, the first project of Chen Innovation's new community housing division. "Some of you might be wondering why I'm here," he began. 3 years ago, I was a student working at a grocery store, just trying to pay my bills and get through school. I had big ideas about housing that brings communities together, but no way to make those ideas reality. He glanced to the side of the stage, where Lynn stood with May, both of them smiling encouragingly. Then one rainy night, I helped a pregnant woman get to the hospital. I didn't know she was Lynn Chen, founder of one of the biggest architecture firms in the country. I just saw someone who needed help. Dayon looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who lived in the neighborhood, people whose lives would be directly impacted by this project. What I've learned since that night is that sometimes the most important connections we make happen when we least expect them, and sometimes the simple act of helping someone can lead to opportunities we never imagined. He gestured to the vacant lot behind him. This project isn't just about building housing. It's about creating a place where people can put down roots, where children can play safely, where neighbors become friends and friends become family. It's about designing spaces that respect the dignity of everyone who lives in them. Dayon took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I grew up in housing not so different from what we'll build here. I know what it's like when spaces are designed without thought for the people who will actually live in them. This project will be different. As he continued his speech, Dayon caught Lynn's eye. She gave him a small nod of approval, and he felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the opportunities she'd given him, but for believing in his vision when few others did. 3 years ago, a chance encounter in the rain had changed both their lives. Now together, they were working to change many more.